Okay, here we go with level 8. We're almost getting towards the end of the Arcane spellbook. This is a guide to arcane magic in Baldur's Gate and Baldur's Gate 2. We're now at level 8 spells, and as always, I'll be reviewing these spells and rating them on a 1 to 10 scale. I'm focusing on the base game, although I personally do play with SCS installed, and so I'll talk about these spells in SCS as well. I'm going to be rating the spells on a scale of 1 to 10 with a pure power gaming focus. I mean, I will talk about what spells are fun or not fun or not cool in my highly subjective and probably often wrong opinion. But the ratings are really focused on what's going to make your character most powerful. I do typically play solo, although I'm going to review and rate these on a party basis. So let's go. I will start with a little bit of a recap of what happened in the first 7 videos of this series and sort of the theme of each of the spell levels. Level 1, anything that scales beyond early BG1 is good. Sort of a wasteland by the time you get to be a powerful caster that has access to level 8 spells. But anything that has any utility inside an alacrity or whatever in level 1 is pretty decent by late stages of the game. Level 2, very weak spell level. I think level 2 and level 7 are the weakest spell levels in my book, considering the point in the game when you get access to them. Level 2, you've got blur, mirror image, and not much else of note. Level 3 is an amazing spell level with spells that scale through the whole saga, and I find myself emptying my level 3 spell slots pretty frequently. Level 4 is all about stone skin, improved invis, and a bunch of other stuff, much of which is not very good. Level 5, another very quality level. Level 6, improved haste, dominates, and then after that you've got some other good spells, but nothing game altering or that's a huge power spike like improved haste is. And level 7, we just talked about it. It's a grab bag. There's no one big bad damage spell there that is going to take up all your slots. You can sort of play stylistically, and there's a few different things that are all of about equal quality. Okay. Now we come to level 8. This is where your spell slot start to get very precious, especially level 9 spells, which have to compete with HLAs as well. But level 8, level 9, you're getting them in mid to late SOA, and they're super precious. So I think with these spell levels, when it comes to the ratings, I'm going to end up reducing the ratings of some spells that are pretty decent, but they're just not good considering the level, considering the other game-breaking or super powerful stuff that you have access to in that level. A decent spell that might be rated higher in level 7 because there's no dominant spell there is just going to be rated lower in level 8 or level 9. Because there are some awesome standout spells in these 2 spell levels, and these spell lots are very precious. So enough messing around. This is not like level 7. In level 8, the ratings get a bit more brutal. And the last thing I'll say in overview before I get into the run through is that hopefully this will be a bit shorter video and try to keep the descriptions more succinct, but I will still be going into detail with a really math and rule-oriented approach. But level 8, in any event, only has 14 spells in it. I'm pretty positive that makes it the thinnest chapter in the spell book. It's the fewest number of spells per any spell level. So there's just going to be less to talk about here, and there's fewer options for your arcane casters. All right, let's go. By the way, the last video in the saga that I'm doing here will be for level 9 spells and HLAs combined into one video, because I think that's the only way to talk about level 9, since HLAs and level 9 spells both occupy level 9 slots. But we're not there yet. So this will be the second to last video in the series. And let's go with level 8. Okay. We start with the best in level 8. First spell, Abi-Dalzim's Horrid Wilting. A necromancy spell with a cast time of 8, a 15-foot radius AoE, saving throw for half damage. This spell evaporates moisture from the bodies of every living creature within the area of effect, inflicting 1d8 damage per level of the caster. Affected creatures are allowed a saving throw versus spell for half damage. This spell is especially devastating to water elementals and plant creatures who receive a penalty of -2 to their saving throws. This spell will not harm party members. Okay, we're finally here. It's the single best damage spell or ability in the game for any class, in my view. This spell, Horrid Wilting. Better than, I guess the other contenders would be like Critical Strike or the fire damage HLAs, or maybe Implosion in the Divine Spellbook, but this is, in my view, better than all of them. This is the big bad damage spell in the Arcane book. It's sort of what your whole spellcasting arsenal is building to in some sense, because you do want to kill enemies in this game, not just crowd control them and have them still come after you. You're trying to kill enemies and get XP, and nothing does that better than a massive AoE damage spell like this one. Why is this the best damage spell or damage ability in the game? So let's go through the reasons. The spell has pretty much everything that you could dream of. It's the largest AoE for any damage effect, the 15-foot radius. It's party friendly, which is massive. I think we had Prismatic Spray, which is party friendly at level 7, but this is the first really good high damage output spell in the Arcane book that is both AoE and party friendly. That's massive. You can drop 4 of these on top of your whole party in the middle of a fight when enemies are clustered around your fighters trying to melee them, and you're never going to hurt your own party. That's massive. The damage output is truly insane. You're doing 1d8 per level, maxing at 20d8 with a save for half. So for a level 20 mage, which you're going to be pretty soon after you get access to this at level 16, a level 20 mage, that's an average of 90 damage to enemies that fail save and 45 damage even against enemies that make the save. The only spell that has a higher damage output in an AoE is Dragon's Breath at level 9, which is 20d10 with a save for half, whereas this is 20d8. So that's 22% more damage on paper for Dragon's Breath, the HLA, but that 22%, that extra 22% is more than offset by the fact that Dragon's Breath is doing fire damage and this is doing magic damage. So I'm going to come back to that in a second. But for AoE damage, there's only one spell in the entire game, and it's level 9 that does more than this. It does a little bit more, but it does fire damage, which is way, way worse than the magic damage done by Horrid Wilting.
Speak quickly and precisely.
The other spell that could be a candidate to say that does more damage than this one would be Incendiary Cloud, which does 1d4, also in level 8, we'll get to it later, which does 1d4 damage per round, so half the damage per round of Abi-Dalzim's. But Incendiary Cloud lasts for 1 turn or 10 rounds and repeats. So yes, in theory, if an enemy stays in the Incendiary Cloud for 3 rounds, that's more damage than a single Abi-Dalzim's. But in tough fights, a few rounds can be the difference between life and death. And especially when you get access to Time Stop and improved alacrity, the ability to do instantaneous damage when you're quick casting spells, multiple per round, is very important versus the longer lasting damage output for Incendiary Cloud. On top of that, Incendiary Cloud is not party friendly and it's still doing fire damage. So we'll get to it later, but Incendiary Cloud just isn't as good as Horrid Wilting, flat out. It's just not. And I think if you take resistances into account and the fact that so many high level enemies are fire resistant or completely immune to fire damage, then I think if you average out those immunities and resistances to fire versus the almost complete lack of magic type damage resistance in the game, then Abi-Dalzim's is doing even more damage than Dragon's Breath, even though Dragon's Breath is 20d10 and this is 20d8. So it's party friendly, it's the most damage that you can do, and it's magic type damage, which is the best damage type in the game. Better than any elemental or physical damage, way better than fire damage. The only enemies that will be immune to this spell are enemies with spell immunity, necromancy, which hardly anyone casts, even in SCS, let alone the base game, or enemies with protection from magical energy or innate resistances to magic damage, which is exceedingly rare. It's more common for enemies to cast protection from magical energy in SCS, so you may need to do some debuffing to have Abi-Dalzim's do its maximum effect in SCS, but in the base game, almost no enemies will cast protection from magical energy on themselves. So in the base game, this spell is truly, truly busted. SCS tries to correct for that by getting enemies to, use protection from magical energy, but in the base game, there are almost no defenses to magic type damage, whereas there's still a lot of fire resistant and immune enemies, as an example. The other thing that will block this is obviously MR. Enemies with MR, you're going to need to debuff that if it's high enough percentage to damage them with magic regardless. So that's sort of a push in comparing this spell to other magic spells, obviously. But the overall point is both in SCS and the base game, magic type damage is the least resisted type damage that you could possibly choose. So when you add it all up, it's AoE. It's the largest AoE for any damage spell, 15-foot radius. It's doing 20d8, which is massive, and it's doing magic type damage, which is the best type of damage in the game. This is the best damage. This is the best single damage ability or spell in the entire game, Horrid Wilting. It's just an amazing spell. The reality is this game is so strong that in the base game, it feels like an easy mode button for most fights, where if you cast a couple of these, half of the enemies are going to be dead by the time you cast this spell twice, and the fight immediately gets 2 times or more easier. Even in SCS, this is still highly effective. You can start every tough battle by casting Alacrity or just having a couple mages in your party cast Horrid Wilting, and immediately any enemy that's not completely magic resistant or immune to magic type damage through the rare protection from magical energy spell is just going to be dead. An amazing spell, and it completely dominates level 8 spell slots whenever I play. It's also the first level 8 spell that I take on sorcerers, except maybe Dragon Disciples. We'll get to that later when we talk about Incendiary Cloud. But you're never going to go wrong taking this. Every mage that has access to it should take it. The fact that illusionists don't get this because they can't cast necromancy spells, losing this and Skull Trap is just very painful. But this spell especially, not having access to this spell is a big nerf for the illusionist. The one legitimate criticism you could make of Horrid Wilting is that it has a long cast time of 8. So even with a Amulet of Power and Robo Vecna, you're only reducing that to 3. So it's not instant cast inside Alacrity like Skull Trap or Sunfire or even Dragon's Breath. But the cast time of 3 means that you can get 4 to 5 of these off during a time stop or an Alacrity if you have Amulet of Power and Vecna on, and that's still insanely devastating. That's perfectly sufficient to kill every enemy on the battlefield inside one time stop or Alacrity. Just one other thing before we get into the rating here. The spell description does say this spell is especially devastating to water elementals and plant creatures who receive a penalty of -2 to their saving throws. I'm not sure if that is actually coded into the game. I doubt that it is. I don't see anything in the Near Infinity file for this spell that indicates that any type of creature has a saving throw penalty. Sort of doesn't matter because this thing is going to do enough damage to most water elementals and plant creatures to kill them outright, even without the slight saves buff, but just wanted to cover that. I'm not sure that this is actually implemented into the game. I don't think that it is, and it's more seems like something that's like D&D type lore rather than something that actually made it into BG2. If anybody thinks I'm wrong about that, please correct me, but either way, it's something on the margin for what is in any event an amazing spell. So rating time. What else is there to say? The spell kicks ass. It does the number one thing you're trying to do, which is kill your enemies, loot their bodies, and take their XP. And it's the best damage ability in the game. It's like an easy button for a lot of fights. Super awesome spell. I don't think I can rate this a 10 out of 10 just because I'm reserving that rating for the truly game-changing or game-breaking spells. And at the end of the day, this is just damage. There are other ways to do damage, even if this is the best way, or the best single spell for it in the Arcane book. But this is still a strong spell that should be stocked in bulk throughout the saga as soon as you get access to it. So 9 out of 10 rating for Abi-Dalzim's Horrid Wilting. And this spell, the existence of this spell, I mean, there are a few other good spells in level 8, but this spell just is so strong that it's immediately difficult to take some other more situational spells at this level. Next spell is Bigby's Clenched Fist. Cast time of 8, AoE 1 creature. This spell causes a giant disembodied hand to squeeze and constrict the target once per round for up to 4 rounds. It initially smashes the target for 3d6 damage with no save, and the target is held. In the second round, the target can save versus paralysis at -2 to escape. If they fail to save, the hand does 4d6 damage. The following round, the target can save versus paralysis with no penalty. If they make the save, they are free to move. If they fail, the spell does 66 damage and holds them for 2 rounds. After the 4th round, the spell is finished. Magic resistance will stop the spell. Gee, thanks. That's unique. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit of background on the spell, what it does, before I get into whether it's any good. First, I haven't done this to this point in this guide. I'm not a big lore guy, but where a name of a D&D character or somebody from BG2 appears in the name of a spell, I feel like I gotta look it up, or I should be looking it up. I've played this game for 20 years and still have no idea who any of these people referred to in the spell names are. So I went and I searched for Bigby to figure out who the hell Bigby is in the entire text of every item, dialogue, book, everything in Baldur's Gate. And the only hits in the base game are for the name of the two Bigby spells. This one at level 8, which is Bigby's Clenched Fist, and then the next one at level 9, Bigby's Crushing Hand. I didn't find a reference to Bigby or the name Bigby anywhere else. There's not like a book, there's not a place, there's nothing except for these two spells. So don't blame me for not knowing who Bigby is, even though I play Baldur's Gate. So I went and turned to the internet and looked up Bigby, and I found out on the Forgotten Realms wiki that Bigby was a legendary wizard and spell inventor, and he, authored a spell book named Manual Powers Beyond Life. Manual, a little bit too literal with these hand spells. His major spells included Burning Hands, and he was an associate of Mordenkainen and a member of the Circle of Eight. He was killed along with Otaluk by the traitorous wizard Rari. Apparently Kelbin, another wizard, also had the view that Bigby overused gimmicks and developed Kelbin's warding whip to counter Bigby. In any event, so he's a male human, alignment neutral, and a wizard, not surprisingly. Okay, so that's Bigby. All right, I guess he's sort of like a spell inventor, so he's got his name on two spells here. In any event, what does Bigby's Clenched Fist do? So this is the first of the two Bigby spells, as I just said. I think this one is the better of the two, since the defining characteristic of the spell, as we'll get to in a little bit, is that it does do a guaranteed stun/render unconscious effect on the target. It is an unconscious effect which knocks down the target and stuns the target with no save.
Okay, so what exactly happens when you cast this spell? Well, first, a giant hand animation appears over the single target that you cast the spell on. That takes a short amount of time to go off, so there's a slight delay before the initial damage and the automatic stun, the automatic 1-round stun will go off. That's important. I'll come back to that later. So there's this short little animation for a fraction of a round. Then the first round of effects goes off, and this is a 3-round spell. So round 1, the target is going to take 3d6 crushing damage automatically and be held or pinned to the ground unconscious for 1 round. That's the only guarantee that you get out of this spell, because for rounds 2 and 3, saves will be applied. And actually, those saves are rolled concurrently at the beginning of the spell. So if you're paying close attention to the text readout at the bottom of the screen and you have all the advanced feedback or extra feedback turned on, you'll see the 2 saves versus paralysis occur at the time that the spell is cast. By the way, a save versus paralysis is the same as a save versus death. And I forget whether the in-game text actually says save versus paralysis or death, but it's the same save. That's important because save versus death is usually the easiest save to make for both your own characters and enemies in the game. And there's usually about a 2 pip difference between a save versus death going off or being successful versus a save versus spell being successful. With save versus spell obviously being the most common type of save that spells check against. So another way to read this, when you're looking at something like save versus paralysis at -2, okay, that sounds good, but you got to understand that -2 is being applied to a save that's usually 2 pips easier to make than a save versus spell. So in a way, save versus paralysis at -2 is just the same as a regular old save versus spell. This bonus is not that consequential. In any event, both of these saves checks will go off. The first one is a save versus paralysis equals save versus death at -2. The second one is just a straight save versus death. And if the if the character affected by the spell makes the first save, then you're only going to get the 1 round, 3d6 crushing damage and the 1 round pin. That's it, the guaranteed aspect. If that -2 penalties save is successfully if the -2 penalty save is failed, then the spell will last for 2 rounds, and if the final save without a penalty is failed, only then will the spell last 3 rounds. So it's actually very hard to get to all 3 rounds. Not that it really matters, but it would be the difference between a 2 round and a 3 round stun, and the bit of extra damage that happens in the 3rd round, which is the 66 damage. So the most damage that you get. So it's 3d6, 46, and 66 damage in row. But if you think about it, in order to get to the 3rd round, the enemy basically has to fail a save versus death twice in a row. That becomes really difficult when you get to enemies that you're fighting at the stage in the game where you have access to level 8 spells, especially because this is a save versus death, not a save versus spell. So that's what the spell does. It's pretty unlikely to even stun for 2 rounds. Usually, if you're casting this, the main reason to do so would be for the guaranteed stun that you're getting in the 1st round. Because the damage, even if this lasts for 3 rounds, you're getting a total of 13d6 damage, even if you get all 3 rounds to go off, which is highly unlikely. That doesn't compare well to any other damage spell that you have access to by the time you get to level 8. Let alone Abi-Dalzim's, which is magic damage, AoE, and does more damage than 13d6. So you're not doing this for the damage. It's highly unlikely you get into rounds 2 or 3. The one thing that you could say for this spell is that it's an automatic stun. That is very rare. There's no other spell in the Mage book that has an automatic stun. So in theory, that's why you would use this. You're going to interrupt an enemy caster maybe, or just get a tough enemy on the floor for 1 round so you can focus fire it and soften it up a little bit.
In practice, though, there are a few problems with using Bigby's as a means of getting an automatic stun off that limit the spell's utility for that purpose. And I think that in every way, this spell is worse than Implosion, which is the best single target damage spell in the game, the level 7 divine spell, or HLA, out of the divine book. I think if we compare Bigby's to Implosion, we can see why Implosion is really, really good for the stun effect, but also for damage, and Bigby's is very limited. First, Bigby's here at level 8 in the divine book, Bigby's Clenched Fist, has a cast time of 8. So even with Amulet of Power and Vecna, it still takes a cast time of 3 to get this spell off. That is a big difference, especially when you're trying to cast this against enemy spellcasters that are able to get spell protections up in that 3 cast time window. Second, on top of the 3 cast time, even with AOP and Vecna, unlike Implosion, Bigby's has this little animation that needs to go off of the hand before the first bit of damage and the stun goes into effect. So that adds like another maybe 1/5 or 1/4 of a round. So in reality, even if you immediately target an enemy with Bigby's, it takes 1/3 to 1/2 of a round, even with maximum spell cast time reducing items on, for this stun to go off. And in that time, if you're trying to target a caster, which would be a prime target for this, it's likely that the caster is going to get some spell protection up, especially with SCS. With SCS, even the cast time of 3 is plenty of time for all the enemy casters' contingencies, spell triggers, and pre-buffs to go up. And as soon as that occurs, then the concept of targeting that enemy spellcaster with a single target spell like this one is just out the window. So that cast time difference makes a huge difference. On the other hand, Implosion has a cast time of 5. Implosion is another reason why cleric mages are really strong and I think underrated. If you can
put on AOP and Vecna and cast Implosion, you're now casting Implosion instant cast. And Implosion also does not have an animation that has to go off before it procs. So if you're a cleric mage with Implosion, Implosion becomes completely busted. You can instant cast 4 or 5 instances of it inside a time stop, and the damage will actually hit during the time stop because it's physical damage, and the stun will also go off immediately. So there are entire fights with tough enemy spellcasters where even with SCS, you can insta-cast Implosion, instant stun, and instant damage or even kill the enemy spellcaster. Because, oh, by the way, Implosion does 10d10 crushing plus 10d10 fire damage versus the paltry damage of Bigby's Clenched Fist. Obviously, not all your arcane casters are going to be clerics that also have access to the Implosion spell, but any cleric that has access to Implosion, you're better off using that spell over Bigby's Clenched Fist. And if you're a cleric mage, then Implosion is amazing, a super overpowered, awesome spell, whereas Bigby's Clenched Fist pales in comparison, and you're better off just taking Abi-Dalzims or anything else at level 8. Overall, I really want to be a spell hipster and say that this is a good spell because 100% chance of a stun is good, but I just can't stretch to that. Enemies that you really want to hit with this will either have spell protections up or be immune to stuns or be invisible, and without the instant cast and instant damage effects, this spell is far worse than Implosion and is hard to get off against enemies that are going to be quickly protecting themselves with spell protections that would block the spell. So I can't justify this against the big AoE damage spells at this level. Automatic stuns are cool, but there's even a better stun spell at this level that we'll get to later in Symbol Stun. So overall, Bigby's Clenched Fist, I want to like it, just can't be justified. The damage is hardly there, and this stun is too slow and too unlikely to be blocked by spell protections to be worthwhile. This is absolutely not one of the worst spells in the game. I don't think anything with a guaranteed stun built into it with no save can possibly be one of the worst spells in the game, but it's not a good spell. So I'll rate Bigby's Clenched Fist a 2 out of 10. Next up is Improved Mantle, an abjuration spell with a cast time of 1 and a duration of 4 rounds. AoE is the caster only and no save given its buff. When the spell is cast, it confers complete invulnerability to all weapons of +3 or lower enchantment. This spell is incredibly powerful, yet has a very short duration, and this combined with its very short casting time makes Improved Mantle useful only in the thick of intense combat. This spell will not work in conjunction with protection from magical weapons. This effect lasts for the duration of the spell or until dispelled. Well, here is a spell description that lies to you. Incredibly powerful, I guess on an absolute basis, maybe, but on a relative basis, like the other Mantle series of spells, this spell is completely useless when you compare it to protection for magical weapons that you got at level 6. This is the second in the series of Mantle spells. At level 7, there was Mantle. Now you have Improved Mantle at level 8, and then there's Absolute Immunity at level 9. We talked at level 7 about why Mantle sucks, because protection for magical weapons is better than it in every way. And here we have Improved Mantle, which is the same thing as Mantle, except now instead of protecting against normal +1 and +2 weapons, this spell also protects against +3 weapons. The problem is the same. This is still far worse than protection for magical weapons at level 6. Many enemies, by TOB certainly, will be striking with +4 weapons, so this spell does nothing against them, whereas protection for magical weapons will block those weapons, as well as +5 and +6 weapons as well. In addition, in some sense, Improved Mantle is even more painful than Mantle at level 7, considering that now you have to give up a very powerful level 8 spell that could really turn a fight for you with an extra Horrid Wilting or a Simulacrum or something like that. So you're getting a spell here. The only advantage over protection for magical weapons is that it protects you against normal weapons as well. By the time you are a level 16 mage with access to level 8 spells, you don't care about normal weapons. You have really low AC, you have stone skins, you have mirror images, you don't even face enemies with normal weapons anymore. Full stop. So yeah, the concept that you would ever use this over level 6 protection for magical weapons is ridiculous. This is a trash spell. Never take it. It's completely obsoleted by protection for magical weapons at level 6. And I rated Mantle at level 7, a 1 out of 10. And although +4 weapons, so the weapons that are sufficient to get around the improved Mantle, are rarer, this is still one of the worst spells in the game, considering that this is a really stacked spell level where you don't want to give up a level 8 spell slot for something that a level 6 spell does better. Improved Mantle, another one of the worst spells in the game, 1 out of 10 rating. Next up is Incendiary Cloud. Incendiary Cloud is an evocation spell. It has a cast time of 8, a duration of 1 turn, 15-foot radius AoE, saving throw halves the damage. This spell creates a billowing cloud of roaring flame. Any in the area of the spell must leave the cloud immediately or suffer 1d4 points of fire damage per level of the caster each round while in the area of effect, with a save versus spell for half. Okay, so this is the other huge damage spell at level 8, in addition to Abi-Dalzim's. I already talked a little bit about why Abi-Dalzim's is better. Abi-Dalzim's has magic damage type, which is far superior to fire, because it's much less resisted. Abi-Dalzim's is also party friendly. That's huge. And Abi-Dalzim's hits harder than Incendiary Cloud in one go, given that Abi-Dalzim's is 1d8 per level and Incendiary Cloud is 1d4. However, this is still a good spell, even though it is fire damage. You're doing up to 20d4 fire damage per round, and this lasts 10 rounds. So that's an average of 50 damage per round, or 25 if all of your enemies are making saves. That's 250 damage per cast of this spell for enemies that are in the cloud for 10 rounds and make saves every single round. And it's 500 damage for enemies that fail their saves each round. So clearly, one Incendiary Cloud, let alone stacking these things on top of each other, which they do stack, but one Incendiary Cloud will kill anything in the AoE that doesn't have fire resistance, either innately or through spells, or magic resistance, I suppose. But the point is, if you can get enemies to stay inside the area for the whole duration and they don't have fire resistance, then Incendiary Cloud is going to kill those enemies. And that still makes this a good and quite strong spell. I mean, that's what we should expect for level 8 spells, though. We're getting to the very end of the spellbook, and there should be very powerful stuff like this. And then it becomes about, well, weighing the different options that you have within the spell level. And here, Incendiary Cloud does run into some limitations that make it not as good as Abi-Dalzim's and also unlikely to really work, as I just outlined, where you have enemies that don't have magic resistance and don't have fire resistance sitting in the AoE. I mean, first, obviously, as I've said, in most high-level enemies, demons, ball spawn, liches, etc., are either innately immune to fire or they're casting protection spells on themselves. And in SCS, that's even way more true. The SCS scripting for mages makes them cast protection from fire and or protection from the elements, plus resistances, etc. on themselves. And most enemy spellcasters that you're going to face with SCS are therefore completely immune to fire damage. On top of that, the other problem is, given that this is not party friendly, using this spell with party play is almost a death wish. You have to have your entire party 100% fire resistant, and the second that anyone gets dispelled, to the extent that you made them fire resistant through potions or buffs, then they're highly likely to die if they're stuck in the cloud. So obviously those two things are pretty limiting, and it's very hard to cast powerful spells, even if they're very powerful offensively, if there's a chance that they're going to kill your own party, ever. Now, all that said, I think that situationally, there are certain situations where Incendiary Cloud is better than Abi-Dalzim's, and I would stock it in these situations. I think there's really 3 scenarios that are likely to make Incendiary Cloud better than Abi-Dalzim's. The first one would be solo play with a character that's innately immune to fire, or where you've stacked enough items to get yourself to very high non-dispellable fire resistance. So, for example, the perfect example is a Dragon Disciple. High-level Dragon Disciples, the Sorcerer kit, become completely immune to fire. I still think you need Abi-Dalzim's at level 8 as any sorcerer, including a Dragon Disciple, to go after enemies that are highly fire resistant or fire immune. However, if you're a Dragon Disciple, absolutely take Incendiary Cloud, because it's going to be super fun to cast 4 of these on top of yourself and then run around with your innate non-dispellable fire resistance, knowing that you're never going to be hurt by your own fire damage and toast all the enemies. Of course, another thing that's important about fire resistance is that if you have it through items or innately, unlike magic resistance, it cannot be lowered by enemy spellcasting. So there's absolutely no way, if you have 100% fire resistance through items or innately as a Dragon Disciple, that you're ever going to hurt yourself with this spell. In that situation, Incendiary Cloud becomes much better. I still don't think it's better than Abi-Dalzim's in many situations because of enemy resistances, but it definitely becomes, about as good. So if you're in that situation, or you just like to stack fire resist items on yourself to get up to 100% innately, then sure, this is an awesome spell to cast. Maybe you're a fighter mage and you stack a bunch of fire resist items on yourself, and then you chuck out 3 or 4 of these and then make enemies come melee you inside the firestorm. That's a pretty sweet strategy. The second scenario in which you would take and use this spell a lot is if you're an illusionist, so you don't have access to Abi-Dalzim's. I don't know why you would be an illusionist and lose access to all of the best damage spells in the game, which come out of the Necromancy book, including Abi-Dalzim's. But okay, if you're an illusionist, then yeah, you're going to prioritize Incendiary Cloud. That's going to be your best source of damage at level 8. The third thing that I think this spell is situationally very good for any mage class is that there's a couple fights in the game that test your stamina by spawning enemies repeatedly. There's one with orcs in Spellhold, and there's also the first test in the planar hideout in TOB, which spawns a ton of enemies over many rounds. And then there's also things like Yagashura's Camp, or the Oasis, or some of Sendai's tunnels, where different enemies keep marching into the screen. In these scenarios, it can be really effective and fun to just blanket the entire screen with a thick cloud of fire, especially if you're resting to refresh your spellbook through the Wish spell, and using a bunch of alacrities. You can cover the entire screen with incendiary clouds, and enemies will blow up with fire damage or immolate as soon as they appear, which is super satisfying. So in these fights that are supposed to be very taxing and difficult for your party over many rounds, if you're solo, then you can do this without fear of hurting your party. If you have party members, just clear them out of the screen, blanket the whole screen with incendiary clouds, and then just basically stand there and do nothing with the game unpaused and watch enemies die and you rack up the XP. Pretty fun for that. And obviously, Incendiary Cloud is going to be more effective there because it lasts for 10 rounds and hits so many times versus an Abi-Dalzim's. In summary, this is a good spell. It's just kind of too bad that this comes at level 8, where the best damage spell in the game is also located. So it's a bit overlooked, or should be a bit overlooked, justifiably, given Abi-Dalzim's is here. If this was like at level 7 and did 1d3 points of fire damage per level of the caster, then it would be much more used in my runs, because this spell is clearly much better than any damage spell you get at level 7, for example, or level 6 for that matter, even if it had its damage output lowered. Instead, it has to be here at level 8 and compete with Abi-Dalzim's. It's still a really powerful spell, although I would consider it situational when you have Abi-Dalzim's here. And I think overall it's hard to take this as a sorcerer unless you're a Dragon Disciple, since you already have so many sources of fire damage in your spellbook, and it's almost always better to have another source of magic damage at level 8 in stocked instead of this. I think if you took this as a sorcerer, you would find that you just had way more fire damage than you could ever make use of, and in most fights you're better off with the harder hitting one-time punch and the magic damage of Horrid Wilting. So I'll rate Incendiary Cloud a 6 out of 10, a good spell that has common situational uses. I think anybody who says this spell is like super amazing and they use it all the time, either they're playing 100% Dragon Disciple runs, or they're just not thinking about spells on a relative basis, because if you have to choose, which you do, you only have so many level 8 slots, then you're choosing Horrid Wilting almost all the time and not risking killing your party and doing magic damage. So this spell is a good spell, but I think overrated given the availability of fire damage elsewhere and the level that it's at. All right, next spell is Maze. Maze is a conjuration / summoning spell. A duration that's special. It varies depending on the target's intelligence, as we'll get into. A cast time of 3, AoE, 1 creature, no save. An extra dimensional space is brought into being upon utterance of a maze spell. The subject vanishes into the shifting labyrinth of force planes for a period of time that is totally dependent upon its intelligence. And then there's this table in the description that describes that for varying intelligences of the target, the duration for which the target is trapped in the maze will increase from 2d4 turns for an enemy that somehow has 1 or 2 intelligence, all the way up to 18 and up. 18 and up intelligence, so a hyper intelligent enemy will only be in the maze for 1d4 rounds. Note that if the 9th level spell Freedom is cast in the area where the creature is mazed, it will effectively bring her back to this plane, ending the spell prematurely. Note that a mazed creature is not freed through Dispel magic.
Yes, what certainly.
Okay, so here we have the first of a couple of high-level spells that are conventional crowd control in the sense that they remove a single enemy from the fight, but they're unconventional and they're higher level spells in the sense that there is no save. So there's Maze at level 8, and then at level 9, you get Imprisonment, which is the better version. The only way to end either of these spells prematurely is to cast the 9th level spell Freedom.
Yes?
For Maze, in all likelihood, you will not have a Freedom spell saved if this is cast against one of your party members, since it's hard to save a 9th level spell slot just for having Freedom available all the time. That would be a very tough way to give up a 9th level spell slot and forego all the other strong spells at level 9. So if you're hit with this spell, you're probably just going to have to wait out the duration of the spell. This spell, when used against you, can be a real run killer for solo runs. I recently had a solo sorcerer run where I was in the middle of BG2 and I got KO'd by a maze spell. If you're solo, a maze spell will just bring up the death screen. If you're playing party play and you have other party members alive, then the player character will be affected by the spell, but just go into the maze and come back out and be fine. Note that this is different treatment in the game than Imprisonment. If you're hit by Imprisonment, even if you have alive party members, the game treats that as a death no matter what. So you can survive a maze being cast against the player character with alive party members, but you cannot survive a level 9 Imprisonment.
And obviously, a key aspect and strength of the Maze spell is that there is no save. The question then becomes, what does block this spell? It's important to know the answer to that so that you don't die like I did on my sorcerer run. First, magic resistance does block this spell. Normally, that's pretty basic to say. However, in the case of Maze and Imprisonment, there's actually a critical distinction because Imprisonment at level 9 is actually one of the very few spells in the game that is not affected by magic resistance. Obviously, that makes Imprisonment at level 9 much stronger than Maze at level 8. Since high-level enemies that you would want to get rid of for a short period of time, one attribute that many of them have in common is that they're highly magic resistant. But that magic resistance will block level 8 Maze. What else blocks this? Spell immunity conjuration. I know that's a little counterintuitive that this is not an enchantment spell, but that's just the way the game works. This is a conjuration spell, so spell immunity conjuration will block it. Spell immunity conjuration is an unlikely buff to have on yourself. I will use it sometimes when I'm heading into a fight against druids that might cast summon insects against me. Otherwise, the main reason that this is relevant is because spell immunity has an instant cast time with AOP and Vecna, and it also has built-in improved alacrity. So you very much can save your ass and save your run by having a spell immunity stocked, and in the time that you see the Maze orb, in the time that you see an enemy casting Maze, there is no orb. And once the Maze animation appears, it doesn't matter what you do, you're done. So you have to see an enemy mage casting Maze, but in that instant, you could cast spell immunity conjuration and survive the spell. So that's the second thing. There's MR, there's spell immunity conjuration. The next thing that blocks this is chaotic commands, the level 5 priest spell. This is probably your best solution in the base game to protect yourself and your party against Maze, since it has a long duration and it's only a level 5 spell. Chaotic Commands is a great spell out of the Divine Book. If you have Icewind Dale spells installed, then Impervious Sanctity of Mind will also work. That's almost an essential buff to have up at all times on your Divine Casters if you have Icewind Dale spells installed. But Chaotic Commands will do the trick in the base game, so that's probably your best bet if you're fighting enemy mages that cast this, like Cowled Wizards. And then the fourth thing that will protect you against Maze is spell protections, given that this is a single target spell. So things like spell turning, deflection, spell trap. Maze is a perfect example of why spell turning and spell deflection are high quality spells that can completely save your ass. This is a very nasty single target effect that can auto kill you if you don't have one of those spell protections up and you're soloing, or the rest of your party is dead. What are some things that do not block the Maze spell? Well, you don't get a save, as mentioned. The Greenstone Amulet, which is a super useful item from BG1, that is one of the only ways to not die to charm spells in BG1. It's sold at Olgoth's Beard. The Greenstone Amulet does not protect you against Maze. I feel like it probably should, but it's a type of thing where that item was created with the Tales of the Sword Coast expansion when Maze didn't even exist yet, because BG2 didn't exist. So the amulet doesn't protect you. Potions of Clarity, which do protect you against fear, confusion, etc., also do not protect you against Maze. So be careful. Other things to note about how this spell works. With a cast time of 3, you can cast this instantly with Robe of Vecna, and that creates a couple more use cases for it. What is the primary reason you would use this spell? Well, I find it kind of hard to come up with one, in all honesty, why you would use this spell. It seems strong in principle to have a no-save crowd control, but the limitations or things that block it do limit the utility of the spell. You don't want to use it against enemies with high MR. You don't want to use it against any enemies that have spell protections up, trap, turning, deflection. So very hard to use this against enemy mages.
And what does that really leave for enemies that are so scary that you need to get rid of them for a short period of time? I'm not really sure. Yeah. It's hard to think of what maybe like tough humanoid enemies that you don't have stone skins or protection from magical weapons anymore, or you just want to try to swing a fight marginally in your favor at the beginning of the fight. But like if you wanted to do that, then just chuck out a Horrid Wilting, which is also a level 8 spell, and might kill 2 of the enemies, and then you're just done with them permanently. I don't know. It's hard. It's really hard to think of a situation where any situation in any run where I'm like, oh damn, I wish I had a maze spell, and that would have worked. Base game or SCS, even more so in SCS because this thing is blocked by spell protections, which every enemy has. I'd also add there's no way to tell enemy intelligence, so it's not really predictable whether this thing is going to make the enemy go away for something meaningful like 44 rounds for intelligence 9 to 11, or something that could be as short as 1 round for 18 and up intelligence. And it's not at all intuitive what enemies are, quote, smart or not. Skeleton warriors have an intelligence of 16. Skeletons are like super smart. Who knew? That means you're going to trap a skeleton warrior for 2d4 rounds, not very long. Umber Hulks have 16 intelligence, Spirit Trolls 16, fledgling vampires 15, vampires 9. I guess you become dumber when you graduate from a fledgling vampire to full vampire status. So maybe you use this against a vampire. Beholders have 16 intelligence and usually have spell protections up and are hard to even approach with mages. Maybe a beholder is a reason that you want this. I don't know. Overall, if this spell went through MR, like imprisonment, then I don't even think that would be overpowered. That would make it just justifiable to take to like as an early way to battle planetars, for example, or very tough enemy summons. But it doesn't go through MR. If it did, then it would be clearly very useful against certain enemies, planetar and demons, that are really hard to deal with in other ways. Without that, I just don't see a good use case for this. Even Power Word Blind at this same level is a better disable because it goes through spell protections, it's AoE, and it's a longer lasting debuff against many enemies. And Power Word Stun, also at this level, is certainly a better debuff than this. You're stunning enemies, so they become mincemeat. You're stunning them for a long time, much longer than Maze would last. And Power Word Stun is AoE, and even though it has a save, there's save penalties. So, I don't know. Maze, it's a spell that seems like it should be strong because it can be very deadly when used against you, but is just not as powerful when used offensively because it doesn't automatically win the game for you. Like you don't automatically kill a Melisande when you maze a single enemy, whereas enemies will end your run if they maze you and you don't have a party. So it's deadly when used against you, but just not a very strong spell to use offensively given all the limitations that I brought up. I just don't find myself stocking this versus just like outright blowing up entire battlefields with Abi-Dalzims or even Incendiary Cloud. I will rate Maze a 3 out of 10 spell. Next spell is Pierce Shield, an abjuration spell. A cast time of 8, AoE 1 creature, no save. When this spell is cast, it launches a massive attack on an enemy wizard's spell defenses. The target's magic resistance will be lowered by 10% plus 1% per level of the caster. Next, Pierce Shield will cancel 1 spell protection of any level. For example, if this spell was cast by a 15th level wizard, the target creature would lose 25% magic resistance from its current total, reducing it to 0 if less than that remains, as well as canceling 1 spell protection if the mage currently has one. The list of spells that this includes The list of spells that this includes. Okay, there's a missing word there. The list of spells that this spell disables or dispels are minor spell turning, minor spell deflection, minor globe, spell immunity, globe of invulnerability, spell turning, spell shield, and spell trap. So it's basically a ruby ray, right? Magic resistance does not affect the spell, nor do any of the spell protections. The resistance remains lowered for one round per level of the caster, and this spell cannot be dispelled. Okay, so this is the third spell in the Arcane book that will lower magic resistance. We had lower resistance at level 5 and Pierce Magic at level 6, both of which are quality spells, and now you get Pierce Shield at level 8. I've already talked about this spell a little bit when I talked about the level 5 and level 6 versions. Pierce Magic was a combo secret word and lowering resistance 1 point per level of the caster, capping at 20 points. Now at level 8, we get Pierce Shield, which lowers resistance 10 points plus 1 per level, so same thing as lower resist at level 5, and combos that with a Ruby Ray of reversal instead of a secret word. So you're getting a slightly more powerful anti-spell protection spell baked in with a lower resist. However, Ruby Ray is an overrated spell if you want to understand why, and why there's not that much of a difference between a Ruby Ray and a secret word is as good or better in almost all situations. Then go listen to the level 7 spell guide. I won't repeat it here. But basically, the only difference is that Ruby Ray dispels spell traps, and there's a lot of reasons that you don't care about dispelling spell traps. So if you compare this spell, Pierce Shield, to what you get at level 6, it's just really hard, I think, to justify this spell. You get 10 points more MR lowering, but you have a longer cast time, 3 times as long with AOP and Vecna. You're going from a cast time of 1 to a cast time of 3. And that makes a big difference inside like Time Stop or an Alacrity. So you have a longer cast time, and you're getting a Ruby Ray versus a secret word. That's not a meaningful advantage. So I just can't see taking Pierce Shield at level 8 over something that you get in almost as good a version with a much less powerful spell slot at level 6. So the opportunity cost of taking your anti-MR and anti-spell protection spells at level 8, such a high spell level, is just huge versus taking a combo of level 4, 5, and 6 spells. In SCS, I think that the Ravager is immune to level 7 spells and below, so this spell is the one spell in the game that can lower the Ravager's MR, so you might want it for that one fight. But other than that, I can't think of any time in the entire saga when I choose Pierce Shield over Pierce Magic. And I think that's just the superior way to play. Maybe if you prefer taking down more MR per cast and you don't value other level 5 spells more, then you take lower resist, but you still don't take Pierce Shield at level 8. This is definitely not one of the worst spells in the game, simply because removing spell protections and lowering magic resistance are necessary in this game if you're a high level caster. Certainly the lowering MR is necessary, and there's not too many options to do it, but this is the worst of those options. For example, I'm definitely skipping this spell on a sorcerer and taking probably Pierce Magic instead. And in such a stacked spell level as level 8, it's painful enough. The relative value of this spell is low enough that I will go with a 2 out of 10 rating for Pierce Shield. 2 out of 10. Next up is Power Word Blind. Power Word Blind has a duration of 6 rounds, a cast time of 1. Area of effect is 4-foot radius, no save. When a Power Word Blind spell is cast, 1 or more creatures within the area of effect become sightless. The spellcaster selects 1 creature as the target center, and the effect spreads outwards from the center, affecting all within a 4-foot radius. This lasts for 6 rounds or until dispelled. All of the effects of blindness apply to the victims, such as penalty to hit and to AC. The visibility range of the afflicted character is also decreased. Okay, so we're now getting, this is the latest power word spell in the series of power word spells. The theme with the power word spells is that there's no save to protect enemies against these spells. And this one, Power Word Blind, is one of the few spells in the entire game that's a debuff with no save and also no HP or level limitation for the enemy attached to it. You add Power Word Silence at level 6, which is significantly worse than this, and then you get Power Word Blind at level 8. Now, in case you forgot, let's get quickly into talking about my view of this spell and its quality. In case you forgot, Blind is a level 1 mage spell. Level 1. There, it's a single target spell, so there's none of this tiny 4-foot AoE, and it does come with a save for a spell with no penalties to negate, but the effect is the same. The affected creature will not be able to see past melee range and will suffer a -4 penalty to armor class and THAC0. That is the effect of being blind. These AC and THAC0 penalties were consequential at level 1. In BG1, AC and THAC0 matters a lot more. In BG1, everyone has crap attack rolls, and a 4-pip swing can make a major difference. By the time of level 8 spells, though, AC and THAC0 are borderline irrelevant. Fighters and enemy melee attackers will have insanely low THAC0s, and you're relying much more so on spells and resistances to protect yourself than your AC. So what you're really getting out of this spell is being able to limit the enemy's line of sight so that it can't hit you with ranged attacks or spells. And that is a great effect. Enemies don't share line of sight, so if you hit an enemy that has a ranged attack or an enemy spellcaster with one of these things, then that is going to basically take that enemy out of the fight. I'm not really sure, in terms of duration, comparing this to the level 1 spell, I'm not really sure why this only had to last 6 rounds. We're talking about a level 8 spell here with a tiny AoE. Level 1 blind lasts for 2 hours. So at least if you do successfully get it off and the enemy doesn't save, then level 1 blind will basically blind an enemy until you kill them. 2 hours is forever. 6 rounds may not even last an entire fight. This spell, Power Blind, is party friendly, so you can't blind your party, even if you target them specifically. It's counted as single, now into sort of whether this is a single target or AoE spell. And I did test this out because I think one of the major defects of Power Word Silence, for example, is that that's a single target spell, so it's blocked by spell protections. And so mages, who are one of the main enemies that you'd want to target with a Power Word Silence, have the exact counter to that spell. So if mages spell protections also blocked Power Word Blind, then this would be an even worse, this would also be a very defective spell, and it'd be really hard to justify this over level 1 blindness. However, there's some nuance here. You could not target an enemy mage with improved invis with this spell. So this spell is counted as a single target spell for purposes of seeing if it can target invisible creatures. However, the strange thing is with Power Word Blind is that this spell does not count as a single target spell when checking against spell protections in the base game. So you can blind enemy mages through their spell traps, spell turnings, and spell deflections, etc. That's a huge thing because one of the main enemies you'd want to cast this against is enemy casters, who then can't see you and can't cast spells against you, and Power Word Blind does work for that. And it makes this spell at level 8 clearly better than level 1 blind in at least one way. There's really 2 ways, that way and then the lack of a save. I think big picture, this spell it's the epitome of situational. Almost to the point that I would consider it a form of role-playing to even take this spell over the massive AoE damage of Horrid Wilting, for example, which will one-shot kill a lot of enemies that you're trying to blind with this spell. The reality is that taking a Horrid Wilting over a Power Word Blind is better in 99% of situations. So you're sort of getting into the territory of micro-nerd role-playing, wanting to have some flair to how you kill enemies if you're taking this spell, in my view. And you need to know which enemies it will work well against. For example, enemies like a Demogorgon, a lot of the ball spawn or dragons, they can see the entire area regardless if they're blinded. So Power Word Blind is not going to work against those enemies. Highly magic resistant enemies are not going to be affected. And enemies that do melee attacks, they're really going to hardly be affected by this because they're going to be able to see at least far away enough to melee. You can hit melee enemies with this and then just back your whole party away. By that time, the 6-round duration may be a fifth or a sixth up. So this is quite a situational spell. The AC and Thaco bonuses are doing nothing for you. It's all about the blindness. And there's probably some ranged enemies or mages in the game that are protected against magic damage, so you can't just kill them with Horrid Wilting, and then you select Power Word Blind to debuff them instead. You also have to consider by the time you have access to level 8 spells, you're one level away or a few levels away, one spellcasting level and a few experience levels away from having improved alacrity. By the time you get that, you could chuck out 6 different level 1 blinds against an enemy if you wanted to, and back that by a Greater Malison and do it all instantaneously with Amulet of Power or Vecna. So if you really love blinding enemies, then I'm not sure why you wouldn't go that route and give up a useless level 1 spell slot instead of taking a level 8 spell slot where you could be doing 20d8 magic damage over an AoE to blind one character for 6 rounds. In one sentence, no save is always good, but this is still a level 1 effect for 6 rounds, taking up one of your level 8 spell slots. I will rate Power Word Blind a 3 out of 10. Next spell is Protection from Energy. Protection from Energy is a level 8. Of course, it's a level 8 spell. It's a cast time 8 spell with a duration of 1 round per level. AoE run creature, no save given it's a buff. When the spell is cast, it confers 75% immunity against all energy attacks, such as fire, cold, acid, magic, and electricity, whether from magical or non-magical sources, such as spells, weapons, wands, breath weapons, etc. This excludes any physical attacks and spell-created weapons, such as Enchanted Weapon and Spiritual Hammer. In other words, any physical damage, such as piercing, crushing, or slashing, will get through. This effect lasts for the duration of the spell or until dispelled. Okay, so here we have, finally, the last resistance spell in the game. And it's a grab bag combo of the various protections from earlier spell levels all rolled up into one. Versus Protection from the Elements at level 7. Here you're also getting 75% resistance to magic damage and 75% resistance to acid damage. The duration is the same as Protection from the Elements at level 7 at 1 round per level. So much shorter than the earlier protection spells that go level 3 through level 6. It's not 1 turn per level, for example. It's 1 round per level, so 1/10 of the duration, on par with Protection from the Elements at level 7. Another big difference between this spell and Protection from the Elements, however, is that, and it's not discussed in the spell description, is that Protection from Energy will stack on top of itself. So in theory, you can give yourself over 100% resistance to all of magic, fire, acid, cold, and electric damage just by casting this spell on yourself or on any party member 2 times. That's pretty cool. It's in itself, and ignoring the fact that you're giving up valuable level 8 slots, that's pretty cool. If you really wanted to be immune to all those types of damage, then you could forget about all the other lower level resistance spells and just take 2 of this. You do have a 50% longer cast time versus protection from the elements after taking 5 off with Vecna and AOP, and a 3 times as long cast time as protection from magical energy, which has a cast time of 6. So after you take off the 5 from AOP and Vecna, that's a cast time of 1 versus the cast time of 3 for this spell. So for example, during an Alacrity, it takes as long to cast protection from magical energy plus protection from the elements as it does to cast just 1 instance of this spell. So you're not going to really save yourself spell casting time through taking this spell. The theory of taking this spell would be that you're going to free up a lot of lower level spell slots by taking 1 or probably 2 of these. I already talked at level 7 about how by this point in the game, it's not such a bad disadvantage to have a spell like this only have a 1 round per level duration versus the much longer lasting lower level protection spells. Especially by TOB, you know when you're heading into hard fights and you have the ability to rest and refresh yourself with Wish quite often. So a duration of 20 rounds is just fine. It's not a big disadvantage. Sure, it's not as good as the lower level spells, but by this time in the saga, you're using Wish a lot. If there's a big fight, you know when it's coming and you're making sure to rest. You can afford to hold this spell until right before the big fight and buff yourself to the max. And you're really focused on, getting yourself to your maximum potential by the time you get to late in the saga versus, lasting an entire day of dungeoning or going through the wilderness. In summary, I'd say this spell is really a stylistic preference type of spell. If for some reason you think that level 6 and level 7 are amazing spell levels and you want to give up 2 level 8 spells to free up 1 level 6 and 1 level 7 slot, then go ahead, take 2 times protection from energy instead of 1 of protection from magical energy and 1 protection from the elements. Or if you want that level 3 slot for protection from fire, and you'd rather give up a level 8 and you have 1 item to get you to 100% fire resist, then by all means. For me, level 8, because of the presence of Horrid Wilting, is one of those spell levels where it's really hard to give up any slots for effects that you can get from other levels. And I also think that it's far too risky to only have 75% protection against magical damage, considering the risk of blowing yourself up with your own skull trap or the risk of getting an Abi-Dalzim's Horrid Wilting cast against you. In which case, with your low mage HP, there's a chance that you're going to die even if you have 75% resistance to that spell. So in my book, I think protection from magical energy at level 6 is just essential. And given that to get to 100% magic damage resistance, and given that I'm already casting that on myself, taking protection from the elements at level 7 and freeing up 1 to 2 level 8 spell slots for other spells is definitely how I like to play versus stocking protection from energy. The other difference, the thing that you could say that protection from energy is better for versus protection from the elements and protection from energy at level 6 would be that protection from energy does get you acid damage resistance, but the frequency of acid damage resistance in this game is just almost nil. Probably the most common source is acid arrow, which you don't really see this late in the game anyway, and that's a single target spell that spell protections will guard against in any event. So I think that protection from the elements plus protection from magical energy, or some combo of level 3 protection from fire and protection from magic energy at level 6 are better than giving up a level 8 slot for something that you can get from lower levels. Even though I don't use this much myself, I'll still rate it a 5 out of 10 spell, which is a decent spell that has limited uses through at least part of the saga. Resistances are always good, and like I said, it's sort of stylistic. This would be higher if it came at any lower level where you didn't have to give up an awesome level 8 effect like a Simulacrum, a Horrid Wilting, or an Incendiary Cloud.
Next spell is Simulacrum. Simulacrum is an illusion/phantasm spell. It has a duration of 1 round per level, a cast time of 9. The AoE special, no save. A duplicate of the caster is created with the spell. The duplicate is almost identical to the caster, making it a very powerful ally. It is created at 60% of the caster's level and has all the spells and abilities that the caster would have at that level. It also has 60% of the caster's hit points and is fully under her control. Okay, so this is the last in the series of high-level illusion spells in the Arcane book. First, at level 6, we had Mislead, which was really an invisibility spell without creating a clone that actually had any fighting or item using or spell casting capabilities. Then at level 7, there was Project Image. And now at level 8, you get Simulacrum. And the level 7 and 8 versions, Project Image and Simulacrum, are really cloning spells. We're out of the realm of illusion spells or invisibility spells, traditional illusion spells, and we're just into these high-level PI and Simulacrum at level 7 and 8, which are really just cloning spells. The Simulacrum clone that you get at level 8 here has 2 key improvements over the Project Image clone that you get at level 7, which make it a lot stronger, clearly, even though there are drawbacks. The differences are as follows. First, the Simulacrum comes out with 60% of the HP and 60% of the levels and corresponding spell slots of you as the caster, versus the Project Image comes out with 100% of the HP and 100% of the spell slots. So in this respect, the Simulacrum is clearly worse. However, the Simulacrum is better in 2 very key ways. First, it doesn't force the mage that casts the spell to stay in place and become uncontrollable. This is a huge, huge difference because, as I explained in the level 7 video, that drawback of Project Image will cause Project Image to kill your mage or kill yourself by making yourself disabled, non-selectable, and unable to give commands to as long as the image is alive. If you use Project Image enough times, you will kill yourself, and a spell that kills you 1 out of every 100 times or 50 times is not a very good spell when you're trying to power game in Baldur's Gate. So the ability to continue playing as normal with your mage after you've cast Simulacrum is a huge advantage, on top of it just meaning that now you have access to 2 versions of your high-level character at the same time. You're taking away the main drawback of Project Image and the reason I ranted in the level 7 spells video about why Project Image is overrated. So Simulacrum, unlike Project Image, it's only ever a boost to your party. It's never a liability to you that will cause you to get killed. That's pretty good. Second, the Simulacrum can actually attack in addition to casting spells and do physical damage, and that's a big difference as well, which we'll get into later. Otherwise, the 2 spells work exactly the same, Simulacrum and Project Image at level 7. The Simulacrum will spawn with your items and associated resistances with those items, as well as spell cast time reducing properties. So that means that the Simulacrum will come out with all the magic, elemental, etc. resistances that come from items on your main character, and the Simulacrum will come out with the spell cast time reducing properties of Vecna and Amulet of Power, which is huge because those are 2 of the most powerful items in the entire game, and if you cast Simulacrum, you just created 2 instances of those items. The Simulacrum, like the Project Image in the base game, will also come out with usable items from your backpack, and your equipped items in your inventory, that is, and your quick slots that you can use on the Simulacrum. You can't reach into items that are in the pack, but you can use abilities accessible by the backpack icon
Yes,
in
certainly.
the default buttons on the bottom of the screen. And you can also use quick slot items in the Simulacrum without using them up or using charges off of your character that cast the spell. So that's the same as with Project Image, and
What is it?
means that Simulacrums can be used for the same type of cheese that Project Image can, using powerful scrolls and powerful single-use items over and over again. Now,
Speak.
that's what the spell does. Let me talk through now what the use case I think is of this spell. So, first, you need to consider that for pure class mages, the utility of this spell is not really there until very, very high levels. Like, it would be extremely foolish to pick Simulacrum as one of your first spells if you're a sorcerer. And you're probably not taking this. If you're a pure class mage, it's really hard to take this in your first several level 8 spell slots as opposed to like Horrid Wilting. That's because the 60% level restriction is very punitive for your spell slots and causes the clone to emerge with far fewer spells, casting them at a weaker spell level, so less damage, less duration, etc. To illustrate this, even a maxed out level capped mage in the base game at level 31 will spawn a Simulacrum that has only one level 9 spell slot. The Simulacrum will still have 6 level 8 slots, net after the one that was just used to cast Simulacrum, assuming that the mage took the extra level 8 slot, HLA. So you get a lot more level 8 slots, but you're only going to get one level 9 slot off of your Simulacrum. So if you have visions in the base game of your pure class mage being able to cast multiple wishes or multiple time stops, etc., out of a Simulacrum, that just doesn't exist. And this is talking about level caps, like level 31, when the Horrid Wilting you're giving up is doing 20d8, and you have access to wish and improved alacrity and all of your powers. At that point is, when you get the max power Simulacrum, is it so amazing to have a Simulacrum that comes out with only one more level 9 slot? Not totally game breaking. It's still very strong, but not totally game breaking. And that's capped out, level capped, or XP capped when you're at the XP cap at level 31 in the base game. Obviously, if you're below that level, even by a few levels, then you're going to get no level 9 slots, and the drop off is pretty significant from there. So this is not a spell on pure class mages or sorcerers. This is really not a spell that shines until very, very late, like TOB. At very high levels, it's still powerful to have a spellcaster emerge with the ability to cast Alacrity from that one level 9 slot and then empty his entire spellbook using Vecna and Amulet of Power. So that is still very powerful, but you only get there towards the very end of the game. Where the spell really shines, I think, is for dual or multi-class mages that also have a warrior ethos. Because again, a big advantage of the Simulacrum over the Project Image is that the Simulacrum can do physical damage. I think this spell is sort of the reason why you would want to play a fighter illusionist. It sort of is consistent with the role-playing aspect of that character, but also this spell, when you don't have access to Horrid Wilting, then Simulacrum does become one of your best 2 level 8 spells along with Incendiary Cloud. And on a dual class or multi-class fighter mage, that's the best user of Simulacrum in my view. That's because you can clone multiple versions of your strongest weapons with this spell, like Flail of the Ages. All of a sudden you have 2 Flail of the Ages wielders, Axe of the Unyielding, the Ravager, etc. You can improve haste the clone or have it improved haste itself,
and then have it go to town doing as much physical damage with 10 APR and access to crit strike and all the other fighter HLAs as your main character if you're a dual class fighter mage. And this works extremely well because the spells that you need to make a strong fighter mage are really primarily at lower levels. And even with the 60% level restriction, you're still going to get access to those spells, and you're going to have enough APR and Grand Mastery in at least one class of weaponry that the fighter that you spawn with via this clone is going to be an extremely, extremely strong fighter. All of the great spells that protect fighter mages, Stone Skin, Blur, Mirror Image, Spirit Armor, Improved Haste, Improved Invisibility, those spells are all going to be accessible to the clone, and the clone can buff itself up with those over a couple rounds or before the fight even starts. And the clone is going to become a very, very powerful fighter, even without access to level 7, 8, and 9 spells. So I think if you have a dual or multi with a fighter ethos, then this spell becomes a lot more fun, a lot more powerful, and that's really the scenario where I would be taking it. On a sorcerer, I'd be reserving this for one of my very last spell selections, or maybe even skipping it stylistically. In a pure class mage, I'm not taking this until very, very late in the saga when the Simulacrum is going to come out with a ton of spell slots and at least one level 9 slot. But this is great for warrior mages. One other last note on this is that I do like to have this spell to chuck into a chain contingency, which you get access to at level 9, because spawning a clone of yourself when you're injured or helpless is very strong. It gives you the maximum optionality, even though the clone is coming out with 60% of your levels. You don't know the situation that's led to you taking that much damage. Maybe it's that your resistances wore off and you need the clone to re-up resistances on you. Maybe it's that you're completely surrounded by enemies and you need the clone to lure some away. Maybe it's that you've been stunned or hit with some other debuff that you need the clone to dispel. So getting a clone out of a contingency is very valuable because it gives you tons of optionality to try to prevent yourself from dying if the contingency is triggered. And Simulacrum is also great for that. Obviously, Project Image would be almost useless for this purpose because if your main character is in trouble taking damage, then even though Project Image will make you invisible, one of the last things you want to do is root yourself in place and make yourself untargetable when you're taking damage. So Project Image is not really useful in that scenario. Simulacrum is. In summary, I think this is a quality spell. It's probably marginally overrated just because people don't really focus on the amount of spell casting that you lose by losing 60% of your levels. And there are other super powerful spells at this level. But it's a great spell for putting in contingencies. It's a great spell for warrior mages for sure. And it does scale with you because as you get higher level, the 60% version of you also gets higher level. And it offers you something powerful enough at level 8 and differentiated enough that it's worth giving up just an extra damage spell. So I'll rate Simulacrum a 7 out of 10 spell. Definitely a good spell and a fun spell to play around with, especially if you're a fighter mage. Okay, next up is Spell Trigger. Spell Trigger has a cast time of 9, AoE the caster or the caster's brain, no saving throw given that it's a buff, permanent duration. This spell allows a wizard to store spells in a magical ability accessed via the special ability button that is created by the spell. This item, the trigger, can store 3 spells to be released simultaneously, all of which must be of 6th level or lower. A wizard can only possess 1 spell trigger at a time, and the trigger may not be given to other characters. Once the spell trigger is used, the icon will disappear from the special ability button. Okay, so here we have
The next in the series of spell sequencer spells, following up on minor spell sequencer at level 4, spell sequencer at level 7, and now this is the final one in that series of 3 spells, spell trigger at level 8. The mechanics are the same as the earlier spells. You cast this spell, you want to do it out of battle given the 9 cast time, and you're then prompted to select 3 spells that can be transferred from your memorized spells into the trigger. When you put spells from your memorized spells into the trigger, you lose them from your memorized spells, just as if you had cast them, but you gain the trigger ability. The trigger will then sit in your special abilities and is accessible with a 0 cast time. And that 0 cast time dynamic starts to get more and more useful as you're able to stack higher level spells in here that have longer cast times if they're cast outside a trigger,
Will not take long.
which you are getting here. Now you can put up to level 6 spells into the trigger. So to recap, here's the progression of these different spell triggers through the levels. At level 4 was minor spell sequencer. I rated that a 4 out of 10, and this allowed you to store 2 spells of level 1 or 2. At level 7, there was spell sequencer, which I rated a 6 out of 10, and that allowed you to store 3 spells of up to 4th level. And now at level 8, you get spell trigger, which allows you to store 3 spells of 6th level or lower. So the same 3 spells, but now you can go 2 spell levels higher, up to 6. So what are some specific examples of what is opened up by this? I'll go through some different potential use cases, and as usual, the sky's the limit, and put in the comments what you think are useful combos to put into a spell trigger. So one option is to go defensive with a spell immunity abjuration, so preventing yourself from getting dispelled with remove or dispel magic, a spell shield, and a spell deflection. That will get all your anti-spell protections back instantly, or you could put a stone skin in there if you're worried about physical damage, or even a protection from magical weapons for that matter. You could drop a triple lower resistance in here to launch a massive magic resistance reducing attack on a single high level target like a ball spawn or a dragon. So at level 16, for example, when you first get access to spell trigger and level 8 spells, each lower resistance is lowering enemy MR by 26 points. So 3 times that is a 78 point reduction. Pretty much taking care of even the most highly magic resistant enemies, taking them down to 0 or very low MR. And once you max out lower resistance at level 20, then putting 3 lower resistances in here is going to lower enemy MR by 90% on one target that you cast this against. So that could be useful. Even better than that, I think, is to drop 3 Pierce Magics in here. That will remove 3 spell protections of level 8 or lower, eating through spell shields as well, in addition to lowering resistance by 3 percentage points per spell level up to a max of 60%. So this makes the spell trigger a one-stop shop to make an enemy vulnerable both to being dispelled, because now all their spell protections are gone and their spell immunity abjuration will be gone, and also making them vulnerable to all forms of magic, including single target magic, by taking away 3 spell protections. If you want offensive power, you could also go for tools that will allow you to interrupt casters with strange forms of chip damage per round, like poison or acid damage, cloud kill, or 3 times cloud kill, or 3 times death fog. A 3 times death fog will do 24 points of acid damage per round, and it will hit liches since it's a level 6 spell. You could also go with a summons approach, maybe if you're choosing to play as a conjurer or what have you, and you could instantly summon an army of 3 high-level skeleton warriors with 3 times Animate Dead. And that's especially helpful because Animate Dead has a cast time of 9, so casting it during a battle is otherwise pretty tough. But if you chuck them into a spell trigger, you can immediately summon 3 powerful skeletons to aid you. Those are just some ideas. There's obviously a lot of options to mix and match.
For me, I like to go defensive with the spell trigger since it's hard to give up a level 8 spell all the time to always be able to refresh this by recasting spell trigger every time. It's also just very tedious to play that way. Another thing to consider by the time we're up here at level 8 with spell trigger, this is more of a problem with this spell than spell sequencer at level 7, for example, is that by the time you're at level 8 spells as a mage, you're at level 16 in XP levels. You're 2 levels away from your first level 9 spell slot at 3 million XP. And once you get to that 3 million XP level and you have your first level 9 spell slot, that's also when you unlock your first HLA. Now, your first HLA, realistically, if you're playing optimally, is going to be Planetar. I'll get into that in the next video when I talk about level 9 spells and HLAs. But the second HLA that you choose should be improved alacrity when you get to level 19. And by the time you have improved alacrity with Vecna and AOP to reduce spell casting time by 5, the trigger spells do get obsoleted, especially for offensive spell casting, quite a bit, since you're able to unload way more than 3 spells per round inside an alacrity anyway. You can let loose a spell trigger during an alacrity, but I just find myself relying much more on alacrity than any of the spell trigger spells by the time alacrity is available. Because if you think about it, if during all your key fights you're casting alacrity anyway, and you have spellcast reducing items to take your casting time down by 5, then almost anything you could put into a spell trigger, you could cast in a fraction longer of the time inside the alacrity than it would take to cast the spell trigger anyway. Maybe you're saving yourselves a few points of cast time within a round, but obviously the downside is if you've used a spell trigger, then you're short 1 level 8 spell slot, and you don't have optionality as to what's in the trigger. You're stuck with it, versus with an alacrity, you can decide on the fly what you want to cast and target at different enemies. So, spell trigger, it is a strong spell, but it has a really narrow window when it's most useful, between level 16 when you get access to level 8 spells and level 19 when you get access to improved alacrity, assuming that you don't take it as your first HLA at level 18. So that's sort of just a narrow window when spell trigger is actually very useful in the grand scheme of the saga. By the time you have a ton of level 8 spell slots, especially such that it's easier to take spell trigger over a Horrid, Wilting, or Simulacrum or whatever, then it's even more true that by that time you have plenty of improved alacrity and you're not thinking about using spell trigger as much to get more spells out inside a tight time frame. So the window for this spell is just small, and it's hard to say that this is really a critical spell at any point in the saga. It's possible to play a run without using it at all, of course. So I think on the whole, this is probably just a bit overrated spell. You can look at it in the complete abstract without thinking strategically at all and say, yes, of course, putting 3 level 6 spells into one spell is great. The reality is that high-level magic gets so powerful and you break the game clock to such an extent with Vecna, AOP, and improved alacrity that it starts to look like child's play pretty quickly just to have the ability to cast 3 level 6 spells inside one round. By the time you get alacrity with these spell cast time reducing items, you could cast 10 different level 6 spells within a round if you wanted to. Now, all that said, this spell is giving you something that you cannot get any other way, because you can have a spell sequencer, a minor spell sequencer, and a spell trigger up on all your mages at any one time if you want, and the duration is permanent. So you're storing away 3 level 6 slots creating a special ability for yourself that you otherwise would never have if you didn't cast this spell. So it is useful for that reason, at bare minimum, to stock some defensive spells in here and save those for a rainy day. And even if you're playing optimally where you only have this short window where this spell is super useful, you still are going to cast it to get that extra special ability. I think for that reason, if you're a sorcerer, I think this is one to strongly consider just casting off of a scroll. Spell trigger scrolls are very rare, but you can buy at least a couple of them in Throne of Ball, I think. So if you're soloing and you don't need to teach your whole party this spell, then I would consider not taking this on a sorcerer and instead just using it off a scroll if you're going to use it for defensive spells that are your absolute last resort. Rating wise, I will rate Spell Trigger a 5 out of 10 spell, which is a bit worse than Spell Sequencer at level 7. It's obviously much stronger than the level 4 Minor Spell Sequencer, even for the level. So I rated it a bit higher than that, considering, Minor Spell Sequencer is limited to level 1 or 2 spells. This is at level 8, which is a strong spell level. And the main drawback of this spell is the issue that it gets obsoleted so quickly, in my view. So I'll rate this a 5 out of 10, a decent spell that has limited uses through part of the saga. Yeah, that's pretty much it for a Spell Trigger. Something that you should cast, but you're not going to miss it hugely if you don't have access to it. And you may just cast it 1 or 2 times to put defensive spells in there and then just have the ability for a rainy day. So 5 out of 10 for Spell Trigger. Next spell is Summon Fiend, which is a conjuration spell. The spell has a duration of 15 rounds, a cast time of 9, special AoE, no save. More powerful than the 7th level variant, casting this Cacophene spell summons a frenzied demon or devil. This fiend will attack everyone in the area who is not protected by a protection from evil spell. Only desperate or suicidal wizards use this spell. Well, it's a theme of the spells that we're seeing at level 8. By this point, we've seen a lot of these game mechanics before, and a lot of the arcane spells are in sort of a progression where you get progressively stronger spells that are along a theme. We had that with Simulacrum, we had that with Spell Trigger, and now we have it with Summon Fiend, which is the next demon summoning spell. The first one in the game was level 7 Cacophene, and the theme with these demon summoning spells is that they're the first spells in the game that create summons that cannot be instant killed by Death Fog and Death Spell, because Death Fog and Death Spell will insta-kill going through MR, saves everything, all summons except for demons, Planetar, and Deva. And so through level 8, the only 2 summons that you get that are protected against Death Fog and Death Spell are the Cacophene at level 7, and now Summon Fiend at level 8. The downside of these spells, the demon summoning spells, is, of course, as I covered when I talked about Cacophene, is that the demons come out as hostile creatures that will attack anyone not subject to a protection from evil spell, and they cannot be controlled by you. These creatures just pop onto the screen and they rampage around attacking whatever is nearest to them, whether that's your party or an enemy. The only way to avoid that is to cast Protection from Evil, in which case the demon will look past you. But they rampage around attacking anything that's not protected from evil in your party, or is an enemy creature. And that means that you can't control what the demon does, and it also means that you do not get experience when the demon kills enemies, which sucks. This spell, like Cacophene, it has the longest cast time in the game of 9, and it lasts for the same fixed 15 rounds, just like Cacophene. So the only difference in this spell versus the level 7 version is the type of demon that you get. Every other dynamic is the same, and the only difference is the type of demon. So at level 7, Fiend, you summoned a Nabasu. And just to compare, I'll go over the level 7 stats versus level 8 to be able to compare the power of these two creatures. So the level 7 Fiend, the Nabasu that you summoned, had 76 HP, a -5 AC, 13 base Thaco, and 19 strength. 25 charisma for some reason. That doesn't have any relevance to anything. I'm just sharing it because it's funny. Low teen saves, 50% MR, no other resistances, 3 APR, and a few nasty innate abilities on the Nabasu. There doesn't seem to be much predictability to when he uses them. One of them is Vampiric Touch, and then another one is a Death Gaze that will paralyze unless the target saves and does a little bit of acid damage and fire damage. So that's the level 7 Nabasu. Now, what do you get at the next highest level spell here with Summon Fiend? You get a Glabrezu. The Glabrezu has 80 HP, so 4 more HP, -7 AC, so 2 better armor class. It has 11 base Thaco, the same 19 strength, so 2 better base Thaco. Its saves are around 10, so a bit better saves. The Glabrezu is also 100% fire resistant, 100% acid resistant, and 100% cold resistant. These are all new attributes. The level 7 Nabasu had no elemental resistances. The same 50% MR, and now the Glabrezu has 5 APR, doing about 14 crushing damage per hit. The Glabrezu also has a couple nasty innate abilities still. There's still not much predictability to when they go off, but the 2 abilities that I observed the Glabrezu using are Remove Magic and Power Word Stun. The Glabrezu seems to cast Remove Magic immediately upon being summoned, but not at an especially high level. And then it also has this Power Word Stun ability. On balance, these innate abilities are probably slightly better than the Nabasu at level 7. The major difference between the Glabrezu and the Nabasu are, I think, for the Glabrezu, the 2 extra APR, so 5 versus 3, and also the fire, acid, and cold resistances. Of those 2 things, the APR are probably more consequential just because with this thing only being alive for 15 rounds anyway, and having pretty low saves, it's going to be pretty unlikely for anything to kill the demon, either of these demons, during their 15-round lives. When I tested this out, just for purposes of making this video, I did see a Lich kill the Glabrezu with Will of the Banshee, but other than that, nothing that the Lich was throwing at the Glabrezu was working. The question is, okay, these things are hard to kill one way or the other. The Glabrezu is a bit harder to kill with these resistances and better AC and HP marginally. But the real question is, what is the summons going to do for you while it's alive? I rated the Nabasu a 4 out of 10 spell at level 7 for its 3 APR. The Glabrezu is clearly much more destructive with 5 APR. It's going to completely shred any enemies that are not protected from physical damage very, very quickly. You do need all the more so to protect yourself though from the Glabrezu, because those same 5 APR, if your protection from evil ever wears off, is going to come for you. So it's a double-edged spell, needless to say. But no, you're summoning this thing probably is not your first option in a fight, and getting something that comes out with 5 APR is better. The Nabasu spell at level 7, I rated a 4 out of 10, but we got to consider that level 7 was a grab bag of spells where there were a lot of different sort of equal options, and how you played was stylistic. If you like demon summoning, even though the level 8 Glabrezu is a better creature, I don't think it's so much better than the level 7 version that it's worth giving up a level 8 spell slot for this. Level 8 is just a much more valuable spell slot, especially for offensive spells. You're going to be much better off taking Simulacrum, Abi-Dalzim's, Incendiary Cloud at level 8, just an order of magnitude more powerful offensive spells than you have access to anywhere in level 7. And it's sort of painful to think about giving up one of those super powerful offensive spells at level 8 just to get something that's a slightly better version of what you got at level 7 with Fiend. This is not a bad spell at all in the abstract, but it's been sort of a theme of this discussion that you have to hold up to the gold standard of an extra Horrid Wilting at this level, and this spell is not going to do as much to turn the tide of a battle in your favor as a Horrid Wilting, and it also has a chance of killing you. So, not a great spell overall. I rate Summon Fiend a 3 out of 10 spell. In a more grab bag, sort of weaker spell level, it could be higher. If you didn't have access to a very similar thing at level 7, it could be higher, but given those things, this just isn't a spell that I'm ever taking. If anything, I would take the level 7 version. Okay. So we're almost concluding with this level 8 spell guide. We have 3 spells remaining, and they're in a theme. It's these 3 symbol spells. There's 3 symbol spells in the game, and they all come at level 8. And the first one here is Symbol Death. Symbol Death is a conjuration spell. Sort of strange. It's not necromancy, right? It's a conjuration spell. Okay. It has a cast time of 9, 12-foot radius, saving throw negates. Symbol Death is a powerful enchantment that allows the wizard to inscribe a symbol on the ground or any other surface. The symbol will remain there until someone comes too close, at which point it will explode, causing all those within the area to make a save versus death or die. Creatures with more than 60 current hit points are immune to this effect.
Yes?
Okay, big caveat at the end there. We'll get back to that. So this is the first of the 3 symbol spells. As I said, all of these come at level 8. This is a themed series of high-level spells, and that's a cool concept. Unfortunately, these 3 spells are really hit or miss with vastly different power and quality, and in my view, only one of them is any good. So stick with me here to figure out which one of those is any good. I guess I'll give you a hint. Symbol Death is not the good one. So this spell is party friendly, although the spell description doesn't say so. By the way, this is the same for all 3 symbol spells. They're all party friendly, and they're all only triggered by enemies. These spells are all AoE, and they're treated as AoE effects by enemy spell turning, spell deflection, spell trap, etc. This is very helpful. Many of the spells that did the effects of these spells, like instant death spells, or there's fear and stun, many of the spells that did fear, stun, or instant death effects before level 8 were only single target spells that would be blocked by spell protections. But now, with the symbol spells at level 8, for the first time in many instances, you can go around those spell protections by casting an AoE effect. And this is true for death spells in particular. In fact, Symbol Death is the first AoE death spell in the game, so it's the first one that's not blocked by spell protections. All of the instant death spells that existed before, so that's Disintegrate, Flesh to Stone, and Finger of Death at levels 6 and 7, these were all single target spells that are blocked by spell turning, spell deflection, spell trap, etc. So, that is at least something that can be said for Symbol Death. It's an AoE spell, and it's party friendly. Next, I'll talk about how these spells, the symbol spells, deploy. They work similarly to Skull Trap in that a symbol emanates from the caster's arms, and it flies across the screen to the point where you clicked, and the symbol will stay there in the air until it's triggered by an enemy. If an enemy is under the symbol at the time that you cast it, in the area near the symbol, then the symbol should go off just like Skull Trap immediately upon reaching the point where you cast it. Now, Skull Trap was a little buggy with this deployment effect at level 3. The deployment of these symbol spells at level 8 seems even buggier. It is hard to get these things to explode, and sometimes when it goes off, enemies who clearly look like they're within this small 12-foot radius AoE are not, in fact, impacted by the spell. So it's just a little bit buggy, and you can't really rely on the AoE. That's just a game implementation thing that makes these spells a little bit worse than like a true party-friendly AoE, like a Horrid Wilting, which always goes off very predictably. And I think the symbol spells, I don't know, for whatever reason, they just seem to be actually way worse than Skull Trap as well, and unpredictable. Sometimes it'll look like this symbol should be triggered because there's an enemy right under it, and it won't be. Sometimes enemies that are like right next to the symbol won't have to save. Who knows? It's just a defect of these spells. It's not like a killer, but it is a slight negative. Okay, so I sort of talked about the mechanics here that are common to all of these spells. Now let's come back to Symbol Death in particular. And is this spell any good? It's causing enemies within the area to have to make a save versus death or die, but creatures with more than 60 HP are immune to the effect. So how good is that? Well, I think this is overall one of the worst save versus or die spells in the game, even though it is AoE. At level 7, we had Finger of Death. Finger of Death was single target, but at least it had a short cast time of 5, making it instant cast with Vecna and Amulet of Power. And Finger of Death also had a -2 saves penalty, and it could be used against enemies with any hit points. And even, this is a minor thing, but even when enemies made their save against Finger of Death, the spell still did a little bit of magic damage, so it wasn't a total waste. Now we get to level 8, a spell level where there's a lot more competition for offensive spells, and we have a spell that, sure, it's AoE, but it has no saves penalty, and on top of it, the spell only works against enemies that have 60 hit points or fewer. Plus, there's no effect if enemies save, they simply emerge completely unscathed. So, the no saves penalty is bad for a level 8 spell, but the hit point limitation, 60 hit points or fewer, is really what makes this spell insulting and very, very hard to take over Finger Death at level 7. By the time you get to a lot of level 8 spells, almost every enemy in the game, even spellcasters, will have more than 60 hit points, and if you get them down below 60 hit points, they're probably close to dying anyway. The other thing about this hit point limitation is that it makes this spell compare horribly against damage spells. Like, let's take the damage spell that you'd be giving up to take this spell at level 8. The best one would be Horrid Wilting. A Horrid Wilting does an average of 45 damage, magic damage, even if the enemy makes their save. And that's a save versus spell, which is usually harder for enemies to make than their save versus death. So, and if enemies fail their save against the Horrid Wilting, they take an average of 90 damage at a max level Horrid Wilting. And that comes only 4 levels after you get access to level 8 spells. So let's compare. I think you can see where this is going. Let's compare, and it sort of gets back to a theme of a lot of these videos. Like, damage is king. Damage kills, damage crowd controls, damage ends fights. Damage is almost always your best option when you're casting something against enemies. So let's take this back to this example of Symbol Death. Let's compare what happens to enemies with 60 HP or less when you cast a Horrid Wilting against them versus a Symbol Death. So if the enemy fails their save, then against Horrid Wilting, they're almost certainly going to die, given that Horrid Wilting does an average of 90 damage, and you're talking about an enemy that has 60 HP or less. So the effect is the same. If an enemy fails their save, whether it's a Horrid Wilting or a Symbol Death, they're going to die. Full stop. It's only fringe cases where you roll some dice roll for the Horrid Wilting that is like way in the tail because you're rolling 20 d8, right? So to get less than 60 damage out of a 20 d8, and that's only if an enemy is like right up against the HP limitation. I don't know. Maybe I'll like post in the comments what the probability of that is. But you're basically you're getting under 60 pips on 20 d8, even when the enemy is right up against the HP limitation. If there's a fail save, so you basically guaranteed kill if an enemy fails their save, whether you cast a Horrid Wilting or a Symbol Death. And on top of that, the Horrid Wilting save is a save versus spell, which is less likely to occur. So even if the save is failed, then Horrid Wilting is a better spell. Okay, now let's look if the save is made. If the save is made, then Symbol Death does absolutely nothing. 0, you wasted your spell. Horrid Wilting is still going to do an average of 45 damage. And in a lot of instances, it's still going to do 60 damage, or the enemy that you cast it against just has 45 or less HP, and you're still going to kill the enemy. So the basic question is, would you rather cast a spell that will kill a low HP enemy whether they save or not, or one that will only kill them if they fail save? It's not a trick question. The Horrid Wilting spell is just better in every single situation than Symbol Death. You have to have some absurd luck to have your Horrid Wilting turn out worse than a Symbol Death. This is all not to mention that Horrid Wilting has a shorter cast time, which is nuts. It has a shorter cast time, a larger radius, and it's less buggy. So this spell is like, it's just sort of like a trap. It's just a bad spell. It's really hard to justify taking it. Either Incendiary Cloud or Horrid Wilting is a much better offensive spell, and this is a spell to just skip over. The only cool thing about this spell is the title of the spell and the animation of the symbol coming out, honestly. If it was up to me in the game design here, I probably would have just dropped Will the Banshee from level 9 to level 8 and had that dynamic, and had this level 8 spell work against any enemy regardless of HP. Even then, it wouldn't be too overpowered because enemies in this game, by this point in the game, they have great saves, and a lot of them are just straight up immune to death magic, whereas they're not immune to damage like magic damage. But I think for a death magic spell, like, it still wouldn't be overpowered to have this work against enemies with any hit points, given the 12-foot radius and the save to negate. That would at least make it worth considering in certain cases against Horrid Wilting. As it stands, I can't say this is one of the worst spells in the entire game. It compares horribly to the other damage spells that you get at level 8. But it's still AoE, it's still party friendly, and it's still against lower HP sort of weaker enemies. It's still going to wipe out a decent number of them. So I can't say this is one of the worst spells in the game, but it's pretty damn bad. And relative to the damage spells in level 8, it's really bad. So I will rate Symbol Death a 2 out of 10 spell. Do not take. Next up, Symbol Fear. Symbol Fear, same cast time of 9, same 12-foot radius AoE, saving throw negates again. Symbol Fear is a powerful enchantment that allows the wizard to inscribe a symbol on the ground or any other surface. The symbol will remain there until someone comes too close, at which point it will explode, causing all those within the area to make a save versus spell at a -4 penalty, or be affected by fear for 2 rounds plus 1 round for every 3 levels of the caster. Oh boy. Okay, so here's the number 2 symbol spell. This is the number 2 sucky symbol spell.
Speak.
So
It
first,
must be
to
done.
correct one thing in the description really quickly, like Symbol Death, this spell is also only activated by enemies, and it only affects enemies. So the description says that all those within the area have to make a save or be feared, but in fact, it's only enemies that are affected by this. Okay, that's at least decent, or not bad. You have party friendliness and you have AoE, like all the other symbol spells. However, this spell still sucks. I don't really have to get into too much detail why.
Speak.
I will anyway, because I can't help myself. But all you really have to know is that the ultimate effect of this spell is to fear enemies. And if you're casting a level 8 spell and the best case scenario is that you're going to fear some enemies, that's a really crappy spell. So many enemies are immune to fear by this point in the saga. There's really no assurance in this working in any given fight, and it's going to be pretty useless in any tough battle where almost all the enemies you're going up against are going to be immune to fear. Not to mention, even if you get the fear to go off, it causes the enemies, who oftentimes will be hasted, to just run around the area for a while, and it's actually quite difficult to target and kill them when they're running all over the place. And it's not like this spell will strip away all of their resistances or protections or anything. So fearing enemies is just one of the weaker crowd controls out there, and that there's a reason why an AoE party-friendly fear spell was available to you that lasted 10 rounds back at level 2. Level 2, BG1. You have Tarnish in the friendly arm in the third area of the entire saga cast Horror against you. That's a level 2 spell. That's causing the same debuff that's available to you in this powerful high-level symbol fear spell that you only get, at the height of your powers when you're towards the end of your mage book. Something is wrong when, you still have enemies needing to save against a spell, and the effect is the same as something that you got in level 2. I mean, we also have Power Word Blind in this level, but at least there's no save against that, and Blind is a more debilitating effect than Fear. So you can sort of end the analysis there. This spell is going to suck. I'll keep going though, as the other dynamics of Symbol Fear and why it's no good. So to talk about duration for a second, this really adds insult to injury. So the duration of this level 8 spell is actually even shorter than level 2 Horror. The duration of level 2 Horror is 10 rounds. This is 2 rounds plus 1 round for every 3 levels of the caster. So, and that maxes out at actually level 21, not level 20. For this spell, that's unusual, but this maxes at level 21. So whoop-de-doo, at max level that you cast this scales into at level 21, you get Symbol Fear to last for 2 rounds plus 7 rounds, or 9 rounds total. Level 2 Horror, which you get early in BG1, lasts 1 turn or 10 rounds from the minute you get it all the way through TOB. The AoE radius of Symbol Fear is actually also smaller than Horror. The AoE radius of Symbol Fear is 12 feet versus 15 feet for Horror. So on the whole, the only way that this level 8 super powerful spell is better than level 2 Horror is the -4 saves penalty. So in other words, if you combo a level 2 Horror with a greater Malison, you're in fact unleashing a more powerful arsenal than this level 8 spell. Yes. So you could just get a spell sequencer at level 7, or, because of improved alacrity, you can actually cast Horror and Malison in less time, a cast time of 6 total with improved alacrity, than this spell, Symbol Fear, which has a cast time of 9. So if you think that fearing enemies as a high-level mage is a good idea, then just max out Horror and Greater Malison in your spellbook. Only take those spells at level 2 and 4, and you're doing better than Symbol Fear. You're casting it more quickly, and you can still have your level 8 slots for actually good spells. That is truly disgusting. That's truly disgusting. There should not be any way, really, that a level 2 spell is better than a level 8 spell. Let alone just the difference being a -4 saves penalty and otherwise the level 2 spell being better in terms of AoE and duration. So this is gross. This spell sucks. I think it sucks even more than Symbol Death. They're both bad, but this spell sucks even more. I hate to say that anything with a -4 saves penalty is one of the worst spells in the game, but I really do despise this spell. Why does it need to be worse than a level 2 spell in any way? Let alone so bad that one Malison and one level 2 spell is better than this spell. I don't know. They could have given this a broader AoE. They could have made the saves penalty even greater. They could have made the duration longer. None of those things occurred. So this spell just sucks. Anything that has a fear effect after BG1 sucks. And to have something with a fear effect at level 8 and still do it worse than Horror in some respects is just very gross and bad. This is probably the worst level 8 spell. It's one of the worst spells in the game. I will rate Symbol Fear a 1 out of 10. Okay, next spell and the last one in level 8. This is Symbol Stun, the last in the Symbol trio. Same cast time of 9, same 12-foot radius, same saving throw to negate dynamic, and it's also a conjuration/summoning spell. Symbol Stun is a powerful enchantment that allows the wizard to inscribe a symbol on the ground or any other surface. The symbol will remain there until someone comes too close, at which point it will explode, causing all those within the area to make a save or spell at a -4 penalty or be stunned for 2 rounds plus 1 round for every 3 levels of the caster. Okay, so this is the last of the 3 symbol spells, as I said, and I guess you could figure this out by process of elimination, but this is the good symbol spell. I think this is the best symbol spell by far. And it's probably the only one that's worth considering or worth ever taking. You have the same 12-foot AoE, the same cast time of 9, the same symbol mechanics, and in addition, like the other 2 spells, this symbol is only tripped by enemies, and when it goes off, it only affects enemies. This is contrary to the spell description again, but that is how the spell works. And this is really, really important in the case of Symbol Stun because stunning any character or getting stunned is almost a death wish. It's actually quite powerful. And unlike Symbol Death or Power Word Stun at level 7, this spell is not restricted to low HP enemies. So you have the same benefit of it being a non-single target spell as well. I covered this at the beginning when I was talking about Symbol Death, but for Symbol Stun, the same thing applies. This is an AoE, so it can go through spell protections, unlike, say, Power Word Stun. That's a major difference. That makes Symbol Stun much better than Power Word Stun at level 7, I think, in addition to the fact that there's no HP limiter. So, I mean, a save or spell at -4, I'd gladly trade that for AoE, party-friendly AoE, going through spell protections, and no HP limiter. That makes Symbol Stun much better than Power Word Stun, in my view. Like Symbol Fear, the duration here actually scales through level 21. So when you get access to this at level 16, the stun lasts for 2 rounds plus 5 rounds or 7 rounds. At level 18, you get up to 8. And then at level 21, you get 9 rounds or almost a full turn of stunning enemies. This scaling is a nice detail, but it's not really a huge benefit in this case, and that's not a bad thing for this spell. That's just to say that even a 7-round stun, so what you're getting at level 16, right when you get access to this, A 7-round stun is still extremely debilitating, just because stunned enemies, every attack is hitting, they can't do anything against you. Yeah, so whether it's 7 rounds or 9 rounds, this is a very debilitating effect. Much more so than, say, just fearing an enemy. So, what can we say in summary? This is the best stun spell in the Arcane book, and stun is a very powerful debuff. It's not the best stun spell in the game. That goes to Implosion in the Divine book, but this is the best stun spell in the Arcane book. If you're playing with a fighter-heavy party, then I think this spell does become a candidate to stock stylistically at level 8, because you can chuck it out over groups of enemies. It'll go through their spell protections and have a shot at... It's party friendly, so it won't affect your own fighters, and it'll have a shot at rendering enemies totally defenseless against your fighters wailing away against them. It doesn't stack up to an Abi-Dalzim's Horrid Wilting for pure power gaming. No matter what you're playing, you just can't compete with that type of damage, magic damage. But this is not a bad spell. Symbol Stun, definitely not a bad spell. Unfortunately, the real limiter here, there always has to be some drawback. The real limiter here is that a lot of very high-level enemies have super low saves, or they're just outright immune to stun effects or have free action like dragons do. But overall, if you have fun with stun spells and you don't mind a little RNG, then I would consider using this spell. It's fun. When it does go off against an enemy, it's super satisfying. You can just have your way with the enemy for 7 to 9 rounds. It's AoE, it's party friendly, so you can chuck it out in the middle of a fight and not be afraid. And overall, not a bad spell, and by far the best of the symbol spells. Rating wise, I struggled between putting this as a 4 or 5 out of 10, but I had to go with 4 given how hard it is to give up the damage spells in this level. I also rated slow for I checked some comparable spells that I thought were good crowd control or debuff spells at other levels. And for example, I rated slow a 4, which is pretty similar. It's a good AoE, it's party friendly, there's a save penalty attached to it. Unfortunately, just like slow, Symbol Stun comes at a very strong spell level with very strong other spells that need to dominate your spellbook if you're going for optimal play. If Symbol Stun was at like level 7, then it would be a much higher rating, but it has to compete with spells that just outright kill your enemies very effectively at level 8. So I'll go with a 4 out of 10 here as well for Symbol Stun. Definitely by far the best of the symbol spells and the only one that's worth considering in my view. That's it for level 8. Thanks for bearing with. Fewer spells in this level, so a slightly shorter video. And if I had to summarize level 8 in one sentence, I would say just cast Abi-Dalzim's Horrid Wilting and you're 95% of the way there to optimal play. I mean, you could create a mage, just have the mage sit in the back of the party and cast Abi-Dalzim's every single round during every fight, and that would not be a bad use of that mage. And especially in the base game, you would easy mode a lot of fights simply by doing that. So sometimes strategy is just that simple. Spell does a lot of damage, and a lot of damage in a damage type that's not resisted very much, and you just should cast it and take it. Sometimes the game is really that simple and still fun. There's some other stuff that's good here in level 8. Nothing that compares to Abi-Dalzim's, I think, which is clearly the best spell on the level. But Simulacrum is good, especially for fighter mages, dual or multi. Incendiary Cloud is another very strong damage spell that would be rated higher if it was at any other level, or if it didn't do fire damage, which is the most commonly resisted type of damage. Then you have some decent sort of utility spells in here, protection from energy and spell trigger. Symbol Stun is the best stun spell in the Arcane book, and from there quality declines. to some effects that you can get elsewhere without giving up powerful level 8 spell slots, and then all the way down to the worst of the worst, the spells that are embarrassingly bad or completely useless when compared to other things at lower levels, improved Mantle and Simple Fear. All right, it might take me a while. It took me a while to get this video out. It might take me a while to get the next video out, probably longer, since it's going to be level 9 spells and HLAs. So there's going to be quite a few different abilities and spells to talk about all in one video. And also level 9 has some of the most complex, interesting, and powerful spells in the saga, which is what makes getting to be a high level mage awesome. But it'll take a little bit of time to do all that research and prep for the next video. So who knows, maybe it'll be 6 months or a year till I'm back. But appreciate everyone who watched this. Enjoy your runs. Post some stuff about your thoughts on these spells. What stupid thing killed you last time you were doing a run? For me, I'll end on this note. I absolutely hate. I think SCS, some mod puts these spiders into BG1 that are just called Huge Spider or Giant Spider that have an instant cast single target web effect that if you don't save, I think it's a save versus breath, so one of the harder saves. If you don't make your save, then you're stunned, and it's basically a guaranteed death if you're soloing. And the problem is that this spider appears in an encounter in Cloakwood, and there's also one in the sewers in Baldur's Gate that you have to be prepared for. The problem with the encounter, I'm playing a fighter mage run right now where my only deaths in all of BG1 were due to 2 of these spiders in the sewers and in that random encounter. The problem with the encounter is you literally spawn into the encounter, and before the screen is even faded in, that damn spider is sitting there and the web breath attack is already on its way towards you. So there's no time to cast any spell, run away, take a potion or anything. You basically have to drink a potion of freedom or some long acting free action spell, or since you don't have access to a ring of free action by Cloakwood to survive that encounter, I think with reliability, I think the only way to do it is to equip Spider's Bane and have that equipped. So like if you're a cleric, you might just be SOL, depending on how quickly the cleric free action spell wears off. In any event, I didn't equip Spider's Bane. I tried to travel out of Cloakwood, and boom, encounter spawned, and I was dead, stunned before I could do anything, and immediately killed. Okay, this is my concluding rant about one of the dumbest things that SCS adds to BG1 and is a complete run killer. No strategy involved, just complaints. I'll be back for level 9 and see you then.